It's always nice to see an established company enter a new market, because when businesses compete, we win. In this case, we have ASUS introducing a new prosumer SMB network setup called Expert Wi-Fi. Yeah, the name needs some work. Now we know ASUS for their motherboards, graphics cards, monitors, laptops, RMAs, phones, and even consumer network gear. But does that mean they can make a decent business level network SDN lineup? Well, there are a lot of things I like about it, but there are some issues that can't be ignored. Let's talk about it. Before we get into this, let me address the elephant in the room. ASUS has been under fire recently for their shoddy RMA processes, and I'm well aware of that. This is not a sponsored video. They don't get any input, and they don't get to review the video before I post it. I understand if you won't be buying ASUS products due to this, but if you want to see what some of their engineers have been working on, then stick around. If you want to write a mean comment about me to make yourself feel better, then go ahead and do that too. I'm a big boy. So there are two parts, I think, to reviewing a network stack like this: the hardware and the software. Let's start with the hardware. We have their router, a 4-port PoE switch, an access point, and a mesh kit. You're probably noticing that outside of the mesh units, this is an extremely compact setup. The router and PoE switch are both the same size, and just like me, are delightfully small. Starting with the router, this is the EBG15. It's got 5 gigabit ports, 3 of which can be used for WAN, as well as a USB port that can also be used for WAN, like a phone or a USB hotspot. Or you can plug in a USB drive and share that across the network. This retails for $90, which I think is pretty reasonable. Paired with that, we have our EBP15, a 5-port gigabit switch with 4 PoE plus ports and a total power budget of 60 watts. This has a price of, well, I don't know because it's not listed, but I'd guess somewhere around $100. Now for the Wi-Fi part, because of course we need Wi-Fi, the name of these products is Expert Wi-Fi. This is the EBR63, a Wi-Fi 6 access point that can be also used as a router. It's got a 2x2 setup on the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz channels, so you're not getting those juicy 4x4 speeds, but I'll be honest, 2x2 is fine for most people. In terms of the router, you get nearly the same functionality as the EGB15, but without the extra WAN ports. The USB port can be used as a backup WAN, but you only get a single RJ45 WAN port, along with 4 gigabit LAN ports. This guy comes in at $150. The last piece of kit is the mesh setup, which comes with 2 units. The EBM68 is a tri-band Wi-Fi 6 mesh setup with support for multiple WANs and 4 LAN ports. Since these are tri-band units, we do get a second 5 gigahertz band, which is actually 4x4, so we get up to 4,800 megabits per second. Super fast. The kit comes in at $300, which compared to other mesh systems seems about right. So if you're keeping track at home, this entire setup comes in at roughly $650. Definitely not cheap, but your setup may be different and there are other units available that I don't have here. So hardware-wise, I do like how small and compact everything is, especially for a home setup. But that could be a double-edged sword, because if you're catering to a business that needs more ports, then there's nothing really in their lineup that has anything like 16 or 24. So this does seem targeted more at home users or small businesses. The price is fine. Like I said, it's definitely not cheap, but I wouldn't say it's overpriced. Of course, this is only half of the equation. The other, and arguably more important, is the software. Oh boy, here we go. I have such mixed feelings on the ASUS Expert Wi-Fi SDN. As I'm writing this script, I'm struggling to figure out where to even start. The initial setup is easy enough, kind of. When you set up your router, you can specify how you want to use that router, as a regular router or with AI mesh. I first did the standard router setup because I thought that was the play. I set it up, plug in my downstream devices, and adopt them into the SDN just like every other one I've tried. That isn't the case. If you want all your devices to talk to each other via the UI, have shared settings and all that good stuff, then you need to set up each device as an AI mesh device. With the AI mesh, you can define a unit as a router or as a node. Your router is going to be an AI mesh router, and all your downstream devices are going to be AI mesh nodes. This gives you a more familiar setup where you can see all your devices and how they're connected and talking to each other in the UI. I don't think this is a bad thing, it's just not intuitive at all if you're used to other SDNs where you just plug in your router or controller, your access points, and they all kind of just talk to each other. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the UI itself. I will say that I do like the dashboard. It provides some useful information, I can add specific client usage to it, and it's nice that they aren't trying to be a clone of some other popular brands in the space. Great, so now let's get into the real stuff. My first gripe here was that there's no dedicated page for devices and clients. Arguably the most important things you want to configure outside of firewall rules. To get access to your devices, you have to go into the AI mesh page and access your devices there. I mean, once you know this, it's not bad, just an interesting choice. Also, conveniently, this is where you find your clients. They're listed under the respective device that they're connected to, which is useful information, but I'd rather just have a normal client list that shows everything and maybe just list which device it's connected to. From here, you can click on the client and see some of the information about it and make some modifications like the name, profile picture, block access, time scheduling, and most importantly, assign a static IP. I really like how easy it is to have all of this in one simple UI. I just wish they'd let me see all of the clients, maybe with a future update. You'll also see all of our network devices in here listed in a kind of map to show how they're connected to each other. You can make adjustments and get information about each device by clicking on each one and going over to the network and management sections. It seems like it's honestly more for showing information rather than making changes, which I don't particularly like. For example, let's click on our access point. Under network, we can see information on the uplink type, port status, backhaul, and front haul, but we can't really adjust anything. Moving to the management tab, we have some stuff we can edit, like enabling or disabling radio bands, adjust the transmission power, and configuring what the USB port does, which requires a separate login page for some reason. What I would expect to see here is the ability to adjust the Wi-Fi SSIDs, or at least a link to take me to the page to adjust it. No worries, we can find the Wi-Fi settings under settings. That makes sense, so no complaints. Wait, where's the rest of the settings? This is it? No, surely there's more. I mean, this entire thing is called Expert Wi-Fi, so surely there are more Wi-Fi settings than a single SSID with my password shown in plain text. Oh, there's not? Yeah, this is a huge issue. You can't call your product Expert Wi-Fi and this be your Wi-Fi settings page. You just can't. The only thing you can do in here is create the main SSID for your network. To make it even worse, if we go back to our Wi-Fi device and look at the networks, we can see our main one, but also another one that we have no control over. Like seriously, it's not listed anywhere else in the UI, so we can't change the name, we can't change the bands, we can't even turn it off. Like, holy shit, either I'm a dumbass and I'm missing something, or nobody actually tried using this stuff before releasing it. Actually, it's pretty funny because if you open the mobile app and go to Wi-Fi settings, you can only edit the other network. What the hell is going on? And I know I'm not a genius or anything, but I'd like to think a UI should be intuitive enough for me to figure out. Staying in the settings menu, we can explore the rest of the settings, and it's not all bad. Going into the LAN section, we can make changes to things like our host name, subnet, DHCP server, static routes, and VLANs. The DHCP server tab lets us adjust our range of DHCP addresses, custom DNS servers, and see our list of static IPs we've assigned. I like giving myself a nice buffer for my starting DHCP addresses so that I have a nice range of static IPs to use, which is why I have mine starting at 50. I'm not using static routes, but the UI does a pretty intuitive job if you want to set those up. Now, one of the most important parts of getting one of these all-in-one SDN setups is VLAN management. Honestly, I think the way ASUS does it here is pretty nice. Going into the VLAN tab will display all of our devices along with their ports and allow us to manually set how we want those ports to behave. For example, let's say we want port 1 on our EBP15 to act as an access port for our guest VLAN, meaning that all traffic connected to that port will be on that VLAN regardless of if it's tagged or not. We can just set the port as an access port and the profile to the VLAN we want to use. It's pretty nice. The thing you're probably asking now is, how do we create the VLAN profiles? Well, you can create a VLAN only network under the Profile tab, but this is pretty much only for if you have a VLAN network defined somewhere else and you want to incorporate that into here. If you actually want to create a VLAN network, you can go into the Self-Defined Network tab, which, surprise, is where you create networks. There are a ton of options here, which are pretty much like templates, and I really like that. Not everyone wants to click around a bunch of places and modify a bunch of custom settings to get a captive portal network or an isolated IoT network set up, so I think this is really cool. For us, we are using the custom option, which first asks us for the SSID this network will use, but you'll definitely want to expand the more config options. Here is where we can adjust which nodes we want this SSID to broadcast on, or just turn it off if we only want this to be a wired VLAN. Then you can specify if you want this to have access to other VLANs or not. And then probably most importantly, if you want this to share the main DHCP server. You'll probably want to leave both of these options off. After that, you have a network with its own VLAN and a DHCP subnet to match. You can go in and change this after the fact if you want. You can also see a list of clients here. So like similar to how you can see the clients by device, you can see them by network. You may also have noticed the VPN tab here. This is an awesome feature that allows you to specify if you want this network to funnel all traffic through a VPN client. For example, I set up my PIA VPN account as a VPN client, and now I have the ability to route any of my networks through there. So in my guest network, anyone that comes over and uses that will have all of their traffic go through PIA. I love this. So overall, I think ASUS nailed the VLAN and network creation setup. It's not too simple where you can't create what you want, but it's also not too complex where the average user won't be able to figure it out. Huge props here. So I just mentioned VPNs, and you may notice two VPN sections over here. VPN Server and VPN Fusion, which is just VPN client. In the VPN server, this is where you'll be able to run your VPN server so that you can connect back into your network from anywhere in the world. You have four options: PPTP, OpenVPN, IPsec, and WireGuard. I personally use both OpenVPN and WireGuard, so I went ahead and just set up a WireGuard server. It was actually really easy. After configuring a few basic settings, we had a WireGuard instance running and could create users to connect to it. When you create a user, it will give you a config file that you just import into your WireGuard client and you're done. They even give you a setup guide to explain how this works. This is what you want to see out of a home/small business SDN. Advanced features that are super easy to implement. Another thumbs up here. The VPN Fusion follows the same trend of being extremely intuitive. You simply click the button to create a new connection and then choose the VPN type. PIA uses OpenVPN, so that's what I picked. And all I did was upload the OpenVPN profile supplied by PIA for the server I wanted to use. Then I entered my PIA account information, and that's it. I have a PIA VPN client that I can route traffic through. I showed you before that you can route entire networks traffic through here, but you can also just specify specific devices if you want to do it that way. And again, super easy to use. Neat. So VPNs, I really like what ASUS is doing here. Let's move on to another important aspect of your network: firewall. You'll see the firewall section under settings, and you'll get tabs for your rules and various traffic filtering. Starting with the rules, it's pretty basic, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You have sections for IPv4 and IPv6 rules that let you specify ports that you'd like to open along with the source IP addresses. Pretty much all you need. I do wish you could set source IP profiles so that if you have a list of IPs, you can just use that. But I'm not really going to knock them too hard for this. In terms of the filtering, it's fine. The URL filter is pretty easy to use and does exactly what you'd expect. It lets you specify URLs that you want blocked on your network. One thing I would have liked to see here is the ability to set these rules per network. Maybe I want to block certain sites, but only for guests and other VLANs, but not for my main network. This is something I hope we see in a future update. Then we have the keyword filter, which I tried, but it didn't work, so I'm not really sure I trust this. So yeah, until this gets an update, I wouldn't use it. Then we have the custom services filter to set which services are blocked. You can even specify timeframes here, and they have them broken down into weekdays and weekend, which is pretty cool, but like, what if I want more granularity? So yeah, the firewall implementation isn't bad. You may be wondering about port forwarding though. I do wish it was included in the firewall section, but it's actually in the WAN section under port forwarding. Here you can specify where you want your traffic forwarded to based on ports. The most common use case for this is if you have a reverse proxy on your network that handles all 443 traffic, then you can set up all 443 traffic coming in to be forwarded there. Easy, useful, good work there. Sticking with our WAN settings, we have lots of settings like DNS, NAT, DHCP, MTU, all kinds of settings that I don't know what they do. The big thing I think of when it comes to WAN though is multi-WAN setup. I personally have 2 WAN connections coming in, so I need a router that can handle more than one. This is another thing I think ASUS did really well. You can specify a primary and a secondary WAN group where you can then adjust how these groups work. Maybe you want 2 primary WANs that share the load with custom balancing ratios, then perhaps maybe you'd like the backup group to come in when one of those goes down. Maybe when both go down. Maybe you want it to be time-based so that your backup network kicks in at a specific time. You can also set the option to fail back so that when the primary comes back up, it'll switch back. Then you can adjust the settings to determine how the failover is triggered. Very nice stuff here, and honestly a lot better implementation than some of the other major brands I've used. Moving on, we have something called port triggering, which I'll be honest, I've never used, but sounds cool. You can specify a port to open that only opens up when an internal device requests it. I think. Sounds cool, but since I don't use this, I'm not really sure how it works. Then we have some other settings like DMZ, DNS, and NAT pass-through for your VPNs. Okay, so I'm not going to cover every single tab and setting in here, but there are a few more notable things I want to discuss. One of those is the USB functionality. I mentioned before that the USB ports can be used for WAN or for an SMB share. Obviously, the WAN idea is extremely useful for those that need it. The network share, I can see it being useful for sure. Network shared storage is always useful, to be honest, but I'm wondering how many users or businesses are buying this but won't have an actual NAS for network shares. So I won't complain about an added feature, I just don't know how many people are going to use it. Under network tools, we also have a Wake on LAN feature so that we can send Wake on LAN packets to devices to turn them on. Very useful. The log section is actually really well done too, with clean breakdowns of your logs and even the ability to specify a log server for ingestion into a third-party app. The traffic analyzer and monitor screen show you a breakdown of your network traffic and how much data you're using on each network. Nothing to complain about here. Something I do need to complain about though, another big problem with the Wi-Fi. This in relation to the mesh part of it. Now we know that ASUS calls this whole setup AI mesh, and the idea around this is that all of your devices are meshed together, whether that be through a wired backhaul or through a traditional mesh setup where they wirelessly talk to each other. The problem here is that the wireless mesh does not work. I tried to add the EBM68 mesh kit to my AI mesh setup, but it wouldn't work. Anytime I tried to add them as an AI mesh node, they would be detected wirelessly and let me add them, but they would just disconnect immediately. This would require a hard reset to get them back to normal functionality again. I updated the firmware on everything, but the issue is still there. This problem doesn't exist when using a wired backhaul, but doesn't that defeat the purpose of buying a mesh setup and naming your entire cohesive ecosystem AI mesh? This is very concerning, and I reached out to ASUS to see if this was a known issue or maybe if my devices were faulty, but I never got a response, so yeah, I can only review my experience, and this is my experience. All right, let me talk about my overall thoughts here. Immediately, you're going to wonder, Brett, would you recommend this? No. As this system exists right now, there are 2 major issues that prevent me from recommending this, and that's the lack of useful Wi-Fi configuration options and the mesh issue we just discussed. There is no way I can recommend something called Expert Wi-Fi with the Wi-Fi implementation being so bad. Luckily, I think these are both issues that can be fixed with firmware or with software updates, so ASUS, I know you're watching, I'm sorry, but you gotta fix this. This doesn't mean that the entire thing is just terrible though. There are some really bright spots with this setup. The network management in here is awesome. It's clean, It's simple, it's intuitive, and it's detailed enough to create whatever kind of VLAN network you want. The VPN management is also great. Both the VPN Server and Fusion interfaces make VPN management a quick and painless setup. Then the ability to easily route specific traffic or devices is awesome. Multi WAN implementation in here is honestly some of the best I've seen in a consumer SDN. The UI itself is solid. The graphics and logs are nice, but I'd like to see a bit more thought go into the device and client management interfaces. Then you get some cool tools like Wake on LAN, AI protection, and USB network sharing. I'd love to revisit this in a few months and be able to give an official RAID owl recommendation, but the pros here just don't outweigh the fundamental cons. I would have loved to give a glowing review since it would be nice to be on the good side of a major company like ASUS, but I call it like I see it, and here we are. But that's all I have for you today. I do actually have this monstrosity of a Wi-Fi 7 router that ASUS also sent over. So if you want to see my first experience with Wi-Fi 7, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, then drop a like. Those are cool too. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube members and my Patreons. You guys are my SDN setup that's super intuitive, easy. The Wi-Fi actually works, and y'all all just mesh together. Super awesome. And if you're still watching, you're IPv6. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.